6 months after accidentally becoming the galaxy's most important janitor, I was beginning to think that maybe saving alien princesses wasn't the career move I'd imagined. Don't get me wrong, the perks were decent. I had my own office, diplomatic immunity, and alien dignitaries who actually said please when asking me to clean up their messes. But there's nothing quite like a crisis to remind you that the universe has a sense of humor, and it's not particularly kind. Dr. Voss burst into my supply closet office looking like she'd been wrestling with medical equipment and losing. "Jake, we have a problem. A big, galaxy-threatening, everyone-might-die kind of problem." "Good morning to you too, Doc," I said, not looking up from my daily reports. "Let me guess, someone wants to clone me again?" "Worse, your blood is losing effectiveness." That got my attention. I put down my datapad and gave her the kind of look usually reserved for people who announce that gravity has stopped working. "Come again?" "Mia, the alien species are developing resistance to human medical treatments. The Krillians are reporting a 60% drop in healing efficiency. The Etherians are losing their enhanced bioluminescence. Even the Zenari crystals are starting to dim again." I felt that familiar sinking sensation that meant my life was about to get exponentially more complicated. "So what you're telling me is that my miracle blood has an expiration date?" "Well, apparently so. And Jake, if we can't figure out a permanent solution soon, half the species in our medical alliance are going to face serious health crises." That's when Princess Zara walked in, because the universe never misses an opportunity for dramatic timing. She was wearing her serious diplomatic face, which was never a good sign. When Zara looked serious, planets usually ended up changing hands. "Jake," she said without preamble, "we need to talk." Dr. Voss excused herself with the speed of someone who recognized incoming political explosions. I was left alone with the Crystal Princess who looked like she had something important to confess. "Let me guess," I said. "You knew this was going to happen." Her slight smile was all the confirmation I needed. "I suspected it might be temporary, yes." "And you didn't think to mention this during any of our strategy sessions?" "Because you would have panicked and tried to find a solution immediately rather than letting the political framework establish itself first." I stared at her for a long moment, processing the implications. "Zara, please tell me you didn't orchestrate a galactic medical crisis just to prove a point about interspecies cooperation." "Of course not," she said. "I orchestrated a galactic medical crisis to create the political necessity for permanent interspecies cooperation. There's a difference." And there it was. I'd been played by someone who thought in terms of centuries while I was still figuring out what to have for lunch. Princess Zara hadn't just used my accidental heroism to create an alliance. She'd used it as the foundation for something much bigger, and now the bill was coming due. "So what's the real plan?" I asked, because clearly there was one. Her smile turned sharp enough to cut starship hull plating. "Now we save the galaxy properly." Princess Zara activated a holographic display that filled my tiny office with swirling galactic maps, medical data, and political charts that made my head hurt just looking at them. It was like watching someone play chess on 17 different boards simultaneously. "The temporary effectiveness of human blood was never the end goal," she began, manipulating the display to show species dependency charts. "It was the catalyst for creating the first Galactic Medical Council with binding authority over all member species." I watched the data scroll past, showing medical partnerships, resource dependencies, and political alliances that all traced back to my stupid blood donation. "You're telling me that you planned this entire medical crisis to force political cooperation?" "Not planned, anticipated. There's a difference between orchestrating events and being prepared when they inevitably occur." Dr. Voss's voice crackled through the intercom. "Jake, you need to see this. The medical data is worse than I thought." The hologram shifted to show real-time health reports from across the galaxy. Species after species was showing declining benefits from human medical intervention. The Thaxun warriors who'd been healing from battle wounds in hours were now taking days. The Viridian agriculturalists whose crop yields had tripled were reporting harvest failures. Without permanent compatibility, Zara continued, these species face not just medical problems, but complete societal collapse. Their entire infrastructures have adapted to enhanced capabilities that are now failing. Great, I muttered. So I accidentally created a galaxy full of medical addicts and now they're going through withdrawal. More precisely, you created a galaxy that finally understands true interdependence. But every species now has a vested interest in maintaining medical cooperation because their survival depends on it. Dr. Voss joined us carrying a datapad that looked like it was delivering bad news in several languages. Jake, I've been analyzing your blood composition over the past 6 months. There's a unique enzyme that initially provided the universal compatibility, but it's being depleted from alien systems faster than we anticipated. So make more enzyme, I said, because sometimes the obvious solution is obvious. It's not that simple. The enzyme appears to be tied to your specific genetic markers. We can't synthesize it without understanding the underlying biological framework. Zara nodded grimly, which brings us to the next phase of the plan. We need to access the Zenari genetic archives on our homeworld. They contain 3 million years of biological engineering data. Let me guess, I said. These archives aren't exactly open to the public. They're located in the Crystal Palace, protected by the most advanced security systems in known space, and accessible only to the highest levels of Zenari royalty. Of course they are. Miar. The political implications were staggering. If we couldn't solve the compatibility problem, the medical alliance would collapse, taking with it the most stable galactic peace in recorded history. Wars would restart, cooperation would end, and billions of beings would suffer because I'd been too stubborn to mind my own business a year ago. There's more, Dr. Voss added helpfully. Several species have been hiding their own medical crises, hoping human blood would solve problems they've been dealing with for centuries. If our treatments fail, we're looking at potential extinction events for at least 3 different civilizations. I looked at the swirling data, the dependency charts, and the political ramifications of my accidental heroism. So to summarize, I accidentally created a galactic civilization based on medical cooperation. That civilization is now collapsing because my blood has an expiration date, and the only solution involves breaking into the most secure location in Zenari space. That's a remarkably concise analysis, Zara said approvingly. And somehow this is all going according to your plan? Not my plan exactly, but I did anticipate that we'd eventually need to force the creation of permanent interspecies medical protocols. This crisis simply provides the political necessity to make it happen. Dr. Voss was studying her readings with the expression of someone who'd just realized that the problem was even bigger than expected. Jake, there's something else. The enzyme depletion isn't random. It's following a specific pattern that suggests your blood didn't just provide universal compatibility, it actually triggered evolutionary adaptations in alien immune systems. English, Doc. You didn't just save Princess Zara. You accidentally jump-started the biological evolution of every species you've helped. They're becoming dependent on human genetic markers for continued development. I sat down heavily in my chair and stared at the ceiling of my supply closet office. Somewhere out there, an entire galaxy was counting on a former toilet cleaner to solve a medical crisis that could affect the evolutionary future of dozens of species. Well, I said finally, at least it's not boring. The Zenari homeworld looked like someone had taken a planet and decided that subtlety was for species without crystalline architecture. Every building gleamed with natural luminescence, the cities pulsed with organized light patterns, and the Crystal Palace rose from the center of it all like a monument to the concept of showing off. Remember, Princess Zara said as our diplomatic transport approached the palace, you're here as my official consort for the ritual of genetic communion. Try not to accidentally insult anyone. I'll do my best, I replied, adjusting the formal robes she'd insisted I wear over my janitor uniform. But no promises. Apparently insulting people is one of my natural talents. The palace security made Harmony Hub's diplomatic protocols look like a casual suggestion. We passed through 7 different screening checkpoints, each one more paranoid than the last. By the time we reached the inner chambers, I'd been scanned for weapons, diseases, hostile intentions, and what the translator insisted was spiritual incompatibility. "Your Highness," the palace chamberlain greeted Zara with the kind of formal bow that probably required years of practice. "The High Council awaits your presentation of the human consort." "Human consort," I muttered. "I've gone from janitor to fake space husband. My career trajectory is getting weird." The throne room was designed to make visitors feel insignificant, and it was remarkably effective. Crystal formations rose from floor to ceiling, each one resonating with harmonious tones that created a natural symphony. 12 Zenari elders sat in a semicircle, their crystalline features making them look like living gemstones with attitude problems. "Honored elders," Zara began with the kind of formal address that meant serious business. "I present human Jake Martinez, whose genetic compatibility has provided unprecedented medical advancement for our empire." The lead elder studied me with eyes that held the depth of geological ages. "This is the primitive whose blood temporarily enhanced our crystalline matrix." "Primitive," I said before I could stop myself. "That's what everyone keeps calling us. You know, for primitives, we sure seem to be solving a lot of problems that more advanced species couldn't figure out." The room went dead silent. Zara's expression suggested that I'd just violated several centuries of diplomatic protocol. The elders looked like I'd committed some kind of theological heresy. Then the lead elder did something unexpected. He laughed. "Bisria." "The human speaks with refreshing directness," he said. "Perhaps this is why their biological contributions have been so effective. They approach problems without the burden of overthinking." Crisis averted, or at least postponed. Zara smoothly transitioned into the formal request for access to the genetic archives, using the kind of political language that made simple concepts sound like mystical incantations. "The archives contain the foundational codes of Zenari biological engineering," the elder explained after granting access. 3 million years of genetic modification, evolutionary enhancement, and biological adaptation protocols. "Fantastic," I said. "Please tell me there's a search function." The archives were located deep beneath the palace, in chambers that felt more like a cathedral than a database. Crystalline storage matrices lined the walls, each one containing thousands of years of genetic research. Dr. Voss, who'd joined us via holographic link, was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. "Jake, these archives contain biological engineering techniques that are centuries ahead of anything we've developed. If we can find the compatibility protocols, we might be able to create permanent universal donors." But accessing the archives required navigating Zenari bureaucracy, which made galactic diplomacy look straightforward. Each piece of information required formal requests, spiritual preparations, and what appeared to be the genetic equivalent of background checks. "Why is getting medical data harder than negotiating peace treaties?" I asked after our 3rd hour of ceremonial procedures. "Because," Zara explained patiently, "genetic information is considered sacred by my people. You're asking to access the biological foundation of our species." "Right, but we're trying to save multiple species from medical collapse. Doesn't that count for something?" That's when the alarm system started blaring, and armed Zenari guards surrounded us with weapons that looked like they could crystallize matter at the molecular level. "Human Martinez," the lead guard announced, "you are under arrest for genetic heresy." "Genetic heresy?" I looked at Zara. "Is that even a real crime?" "Unfortunately," she said grimly, "yes. And the penalty is having your biological matrix permanently crystallized." I stared at the glowing weapons pointed at me, and Wondered if there was a diplomatic way to explain that I was just trying to help without accidentally becoming a crystal statue in the process. Well, I said finally, this is definitely going on my list of worst diplomatic missions ever. Apparently. Genetic heresy was what happened when you suggested that 3 million years of Scifi biological engineering might be improved by cooperation with primitive human medicine. Who knew that offering to help could be considered a religious offense? The trial was held in the Chamber of Crystal Injustice, which sounded impressive until you realized it was basically a courtroom designed by someone with a serious crystal fetish. The prosecution consisted of 3 high-ranking Scifi theologians who seemed personally offended by my existence. The human presumes to judge the genetic perfection achieved through millennia of careful biological evolution, the lead prosecutor declared, his crystalline features glowing with righteous indignation. Actually, I interrupted because apparently I hadn't learned my lesson about keeping my mouth shut. I'm not judging anything. I'm suggesting that maybe your perfect biological evolution could use some outside perspective. The courtroom erupted in scandalized whispers. Princess Zara looked like she was calculating whether it would be politically advantageous to pretend she'd never met me. Your Honor, I continued, figuring I was already in trouble so I might as well commit to it. With respect to your 3 million years of genetic engineering, you still needed my primitive human blood to save your princess. Maybe that suggests your perfect system isn't as perfect as you think. The prosecutor looked like he was about to spontaneously combust, which would have been impressive for a silicon-based life form. But before he could respond, something unexpected happened. One of the court observers, an elderly Scifi scientist, stood up and spoke. The human raises a valid point. Our genetic perfection failed to account for the poison that nearly killed Princess Zara. Perhaps our isolation has made us blind to beneficial adaptations. That opened the floodgates. Other observers began speaking up, sharing stories of medical limitations they'd encountered, problems that Scifi science couldn't solve, situations where outside perspectives might have helped. You see, I said to the court, the thing about perfection is that it's really just another word for stop trying to improve. You've spent 3 million years perfecting your biology, but you've also spent 3 million years not learning from anyone else. The lead prosecutor tried to regain control of the proceedings, but the court was already shifting. Princess Zara, recognizing a political opportunity when she saw one, smoothly entered the discussion. Honored court, she said, Human Martinez speaks with the directness that has made his species so effective at solving previously intractable problems. Perhaps we should listen to what he's actually proposing rather than being offended by how he's proposing it. Dr. Voss chose that moment to transmit updated medical data directly to the court's information systems. The holographic displays showed the cascading medical crises affecting multiple species, the dependency relationships that had developed, and the potential for complete systemic collapse if permanent solutions weren't found. These are the stakes, I said, gesturing to the data. Multiple civilizations are facing medical collapse because we can't figure out how to make permanent what we accidentally made temporary. Your genetic archives contain the information we need, but only if we can move past the idea that asking for help is somehow insulting. The chief judge, who'd been silent through most of the proceedings, finally spoke. Human Martinez, your approach to diplomacy is unconventional. I'm not a diplomat, I replied. I'm a janitor who accidentally became important. The only reason I'm here is because your princess almost died and I was too stupid to realize that helping her was medically impossible. And yet your stupidity, as you call it, has created the most stable galactic peace in recorded history. Yeah, well, sometimes stupidity and wisdom look surprisingly similar from a distance. The judge was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of everything we'd presented. When he finally spoke, his words changed everything. The court finds that genetic heresy in this case appears to be indistinguishable from genetic innovation. Human Martinez, you are hereby granted full access to the Scifi genetic archives, with the understanding that your purpose is the preservation of interspecies medical cooperation. The prosecutor looked like he'd swallowed something crystalline and uncomfortable. Princess Zara smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose political gamble had just paid off spectacularly. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court recognizes that true genetic perfection may require the wisdom to learn from other species, regardless of their apparent primitiveness. As we left the courtroom with full archive access, I couldn't help but notice the irony. I'd become the galaxy's most effective diplomat not by learning proper protocols, but by completely ignoring them and just saying what I actually thought. You know, I told Princess Zara as we headed back to the archives, that I'm starting to think that the secret to galactic diplomacy is just being too honest for people to know how to respond. Jake, she replied with that familiar wicked smile, you've just revolutionized interspecies relations by refusing to act like a diplomat. That might be the most subversive thing anyone's ever done to galactic politics. And somehow, that felt about right. 3 days deep in the Zenari genetic archives, Dr. Voss looked like she'd been mainlining scientific discoveries directly into her bloodstream. The archives contained biological engineering techniques that made human medicine look like we'd been performing surgery with stone tools and good intentions. Jake, this is incredible, she said for the 15th time that morning. They've mapped genetic compatibility protocols for over 12,000 species. If we can adapt their techniques to human biology, we could create universal medical compatibility that's actually permanent. That's the good news, I said, reviewing the political implications. The bad news is that creating permanent compatibility requires genetic material from every species we want to help. Princess Zara was coordinating with alien governments across the galaxy, each one facing increasing medical crises as my blood's effectiveness continued to decline. The political pressure was mounting faster than our scientific solutions. The Krillian Council is reporting complete treatment failure, she informed us during our daily crisis update. Their enhanced regeneration capabilities have dropped to baseline levels. 3 of their major industrial colonies are facing production collapse. How long do we have? I asked. Optimistically. 2 weeks before the first civilization faces complete medical system failure. Realistically, less than that. Dr. Voss had been working with Zenari scientists to develop a synthetic compound that could replicate my blood's universal compatibility properties. The process was like trying to reverse engineer 3 million years of evolution in a laboratory setting while the galaxy watched impatiently. The compound works in theory, she explained, showing me molecular diagrams that looked like abstract art with delusions of chemistry. But creating it requires biological samples from all participating species, processed through modified Zenari genetic matrices, and somehow stabilized using human genetic markers as a template. So basically, I need to become a living genetic laboratory. More like a biological printing press. We'll use your genetic markers to create permanent templates that can be adapted for any species. That's when the assassination attempt started. The first one was almost polite by galactic standards. A Thaxon infiltrator tried to poison my food with something that would have made me incompatible with alien biology, effectively ending the medical alliance. The second attempt involved Etherian separatists who wanted to kidnap me and keep human medical benefits exclusively for their species. You know, I told Princess Zara after our security team dealt with the third assassination attempt that week, I'm starting to miss the days when people just wanted to ignore me. The problem, she explained while reviewing security reports, is that you've become too valuable to too many different interests. Some species profit from medical scarcity. Others want exclusive access to human compatibility. And a few are betting that galactic chaos will create new opportunities for expansion. The breakthrough came when Dr. Voss realized that the Zenari archives contained something even more valuable than genetic engineering techniques. They had records of previous universal compatibility experiments from over 1 million years ago. Jake, the Zenari tried this before, she said excitedly. They attempted to create universal biological compatibility with 17 other species. The experiment failed, but their records show exactly why it failed and how to avoid those problems. Let me guess, I said. It failed because they tried to do it without cooperation from the other species. Exactly. They tried to impose compatibility rather than creating mutual adaptation. But with voluntary cooperation from all participating species, we can create something that's never existed before: true biological interdependence. The political challenge was convincing 43 different species to contribute genetic material to a project that required them to trust each other completely. Some civilizations had been enemies for centuries. Others had never communicated directly. A few operated on completely different concepts of what cooperation even meant. This is where your diplomatic style becomes invaluable, Princess Zara told me as we prepared for the largest interspecies conference in galactic history. My diplomatic style is telling everyone what I actually think and hoping it works out. Precisely. These species have been lying to each other through formal protocols for millennia. You cut through diplomatic nonsense and appeal directly to practical self-interest. The conference was held on Harmony Hub, which had been expanded to accommodate delegates from species that required everything from underwater environments to crystalline resonance chambers. I found myself addressing beings I couldn't pronounce, representing civilizations I couldn't comprehend, asking them to trust in a medical procedure that sounded like science fiction even to me. Look, I told the assembled delegates I'm not going to pretend I understand the political complexities here. What I understand is that without this cooperation, multiple species face medical collapse within weeks. You can spend the next decade negotiating the fine points of genetic sharing protocols, or you can accept that sometimes survival requires taking calculated risks with people you don't entirely trust. The Etherian representative pulsed with colors that indicated philosophical confusion. Human Martinez, you ask us to share our most fundamental biological information with species we have considered enemies. I'm asking you to choose between cooperation and extinction. Everything else is just details. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Species after species agreed to participate, not because they trusted each other, but because they trusted that I was too straightforward to be running some elaborate political deception. Dr. Voss's synthetic compound required 3 weeks to produce and test. I spent those weeks serving as a genetic template, providing biological markers that could be adapted for permanent universal compatibility. The process was like being a living blueprint for galactic evolution. When it was finished, we had created something unprecedented, a medical system based on true biological interdependence, where each species' health contributed to everyone else's well-being. Jake, Dr. Voss said as we watched the final test results, "You've just helped create the first truly sustainable interspecies medical system in galactic history." "Great," I replied. "Now, can I go back to cleaning toilets?" The establishment of the Galactic Medical Council was like watching bureaucracy evolve in real time, which was about as exciting as it sounds but apparently historically significant. Representatives from 43 species gathered to create the first truly cooperative interspecies institution in recorded galactic history, and somehow I'd been elected as the first chief medical diplomatic coordinator. I still think that title is longer than my actual qualifications, I told Princess Zara as we reviewed the final charter documents. "Your qualifications are exactly why the position works," she replied. "You're the only being in the galaxy that every species trusts to be too honest for hidden agendas." The synthetic compound was working better than anyone had dared hope. Species that had been facing medical collapse were not only recovering, but developing enhanced capabilities that surpassed their original conditions. The Krillians were stronger, the Etherians more luminous, and the Zenari crystals were growing with unprecedented clarity. Dr. Voss had become the galaxy's premier expert on interspecies medical cooperation, running research programs that were advancing healthcare by centuries. Jake were seeing biological adaptations that suggest the synthetic compound isn't just maintaining compatibility, it's actually accelerating beneficial evolution across multiple species. So I accidentally jump-started galactic evolution? More like you provided the catalyst for cooperative evolution. Species are developing complementary biological advantages rather than competing adaptations. The political implications were staggering. Wars were ending not through peace treaties, but through the simple recognition that each species' medical well-being was now directly connected to everyone else's success. It was impossible to attack another civilization when their biological health affected your own medical system. Ambassador Glorak, who'd spent the past year alternating between panic and grudging admiration, was now proudly taking credit for humanity's rise to galactic prominence. "I always recognized the potential of human Martinez," he told visiting delegations, conveniently forgetting his initial horror at my diplomatic methods. "He's rewriting history in real time," I mentioned to Princess Zara during one of our regular strategy sessions. "Let him," she said with characteristic pragmatism. "Taking credit for successful outcomes is how politicians maintain their positions. As long as the system works, who gets the credit is irrelevant." The most satisfying part was watching species that had previously dismissed humanity as primitive now sending delegations to Earth to study human medical techniques, social cooperation methods, and what they called our innovative approach to problem-solving through productive ignorance. "Productive ignorance," I repeated when the Etherian cultural attaché used the phrase. That might be the most accurate description of human civilization I've ever heard. But the real test came when the system faced its first major crisis. A previously unknown pathogen emerged in the outer rim, affecting multiple species simultaneously. The old approach would have been for each civilization to develop independent solutions, probably leading to conflicts over resources and treatments. Instead, the Galactic Medical Council activated emergency protocols that automatically shared research data, coordinated treatment development, and distributed medical resources based on need rather than political leverage. The pathogen was contained and treated within weeks rather than the years it would have taken under the old system. "You know what this means," Dr. Voss told me as we reviewed the crisis response data. "That we accidentally created a system that works better than anyone expected. That you've revolutionized how galactic civilization handles existential threats. This isn't just medical cooperation anymore, it's a template for addressing any challenge that affects multiple species." Princess Zara had been unusually quiet during the post-crisis analysis, which usually meant she was planning something that would make my life more complicated. When she finally spoke, her words confirmed my suspicions. "Jake, the success of the Galactic Medical Council has created demand for similar cooperative institutions. The species councils are requesting human mediation for trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and resource allocation conflicts. They want me to become a professional diplomat? They want you to become the template for a new kind of galactic governance based on practical cooperation rather than political maneuvering." I looked out at the space lanes surrounding Harmony Hub, now bustling with more interspecies cooperation than the galaxy had seen in recorded history. Ships from dozens of civilizations traveled freely, carrying medical supplies, research data, and cultural exchanges that would have been impossible under the old system. "So let me get this straight," I said. "I went from cleaning alien toilets to accidentally creating a new form of galactic civilization based on mutual biological dependence and practical honesty." "That's a remarkably accurate summary. And everyone expects me to keep doing this." "Jake," Princess Zara said with the smile that had gotten me into this situation in the first place, "you've proven that the most effective way to change the galaxy is to ignore how things are supposed to work and just focus on making them work better." I accepted the permanent position as Chief Medical Diplomatic Coordinator, with the stipulation that I could still wear my janitor uniform to important meetings. Some traditions are worth maintaining, and besides, it served as a useful reminder that the most important changes often come from the most unexpected places. After all, if you're going to accidentally revolutionize galactic civilization, you might as well do it while staying true to your roots as a professional space janitor. Even if everyone else insists on calling you a visionary.